Welcome to Budgeting Best Practices. My partner today is Fred Herberich. Fred was a member of the group that restarted Maryland Alpha at Johns Hopkins University. He worked for SIGEP as an RD and then on the headquarters staff for several more years. He's been on faculty at the Carlsons since he left staff and has received the SIGEP Distinguished Alumnus Award. He's a senior vice president of Siegel Group, advising boards of health and pension trusts with assets ranging from $50 million to $6.5 billion on design, compliance, and financial matters.
And Chuck Stegman is from our Colorado Alpha chapter at the University of Colorado. He is also a longtime SIGEP volunteer and recipient of SIGEP's Exemplary Service Award. He is chair of the SIGEP Chapter Finance and Compliance Committee.
Fred, budgets are crucial. The execs are going to have to make decisions that have a financial aspect. Maybe an unexpected expense hits. Do you have to cut something that you had planned? Maybe one of the execs isn't spending his budget as expected. What's the cause? And so on. The Grand Chapter bylaws say the VPF must prepare an annual budget of the chapter and, after the executive committee approves it, send a copy to the chapter, the AVC, headquarters, and the district governors.
Trying to run a chapter without a budget is like trying to drive across the country without a map or a GPS. The odds of you getting where you want to go are terrible, and even if you eventually do, the route will be far more painful than it needed to be. With a budget, your chapter will be able to make real-time spending decisions based on current data and understand trade-off as compared to the projection. We strongly recommend you do an annual budget. Let me give you one example of why an annual budget works better. The fall bill from HQ is usually less than the spring bill. If you budget on an annual basis, you might choose to save a little extra in the fall for the spring bill. Or maybe your chapter has a major Founders Day event in the fall that isn't repeated in the spring, and that isn't necessary. You only see things like this if you work on an annual
budget. Budgeting process consists of answering 4 questions. What is the history? What should change? What's the forecast? And do we have buy-in? Let's talk about each. First, history. What should we look at, Fred?
Look at how you spend your money this academic year and the year before. What did you collect in dues? If you're housed, what about rent and parlor fees? Were there other sources of income? How much do you spend on each VP's area? On the fall and spring headquarters bills, what did you spend? Conclave happens every 2 years and budget for that. Did you have to pay any taxes or unrelated business income? Did your income and expenses balance, and so forth? Work with your VPP to draft the calendar with the budget as well. Think through your chapter's money and time it takes to collect, which will help you predict any cash flow crunches when expenses are incurred before the cash comes in. Remember that the best practice is having your dues due in the full at the first chapter meeting of the term, using payment plans only sparingly, and using the 30-60 policy when you need it.
That's the first question in budgeting. What's the history? The next consideration is what should change?
Exactly. Starting with last year's budget is fine, but budget should adapt to reflect changing goals and challenges of the chapter. What goals has your chapter set? Some years, recruitment may be the focus. Other years, it may be the Balanced Man program or a learning center initiative. Don't just blindly copy. For example, maybe it's time to start rebuilding your chapter savings. Pay yourself first. COVID-19 was a proverbial rainy day. It wasn't the first, it won't be the last. Chapters with savings weather rainy days better. Give yourself flexibility. Budget for 85 to 90% of collections, and if everything goes well, put the excess into savings. It could be crucial when the next rainy day hits.
It's also important to understand the impact of recruitment on finances and, if you're housed, filling the house. Do a budget with your expected number of brothers and then another with twice that. Calculate with the house 75% and 100% fall. You'll be amazed at the difference. Share that with the chapter and the execs. Remember, the best fundraiser is recruitment. Look at the biggest expenses and discuss with the other execs whether they are the best way for the chapter to invest their money.
If you are including fundraisers, be careful. Fundraisers are fickle and often don't pan out as planned. Avoid counting on them for core expenses. Instead, use them for enhancements. It is much easier to get people to pitch in for a fundraiser for something fun like a chapter retreat.
Another issue to consider, make sure to balance your budgeted activities. If your activities are focused on sigmas, don't be surprised if your seniors lose interest. Is there a senior on the programming committee?
This is also the point to consider the value proposition your chapter is offering the brothers. Brothers may not pay if they don't see value in what you're offering. Your budget, calendar, and the BMP are tangible benefits that you should talk up during recruitment and when billing brothers. Members pay for an experience. It is the exec's responsibility to give them a clear picture of where that money goes. Make brothers and their parents feel good about their investment in the fraternity.
And look at your dues levels compared to other fraternities on campus. If you want to be the best in programming, you can't also be the cheapest. If you're running out of money each term and are not able to do the events you want, maybe your dues are too low. SIGEP recommends you be in the top quartile of fraternity charges on your campus. And small annual increases, for example, 3%, are much less jarring to a chapter than leaving it alone until it becomes a crisis and requires a huge jump all at once. Smart chapters put a 3% annual increase in their bylaws. So you've considered the history and what should change. Next up, what's the forecast for next year?
Use the history and the desired changes to start drafting your budget for the next academic year. When you're putting a budget together, use a resource such as Google Sheets or shared Excel documents that can be shared in real time. There is a budget template on the VPF resource page on sigep.org. Get each of the exec to detail the budget for their area. Find out what they do with 20% more, where they cut it if they had to cut 20%. The best budgets reflect bottoms-up budgeting. You need details. Estimate your manpower. Estimate the bills from headquarters using the information on the VPF resource page. You'll often have to use last year's formula and your most recent periodic membership report number. The fall bill is easier to predict because SIGEP sets it at a 5% buffer for inflation. The spring bill is not in our control. It is set up by the insurance marketplace, so add 10% there to be safe.
The forecast question easily blends into the final one. Do we have buy-in? Get your exec team and your mentors together and complete the budget and get everyone's buy-in. If you've got 20K more expenses than income based on your projection, it's time to figure out how to close the gap. Do you raise dues? Do you recruit more men? Do you cut expenses? Similarly, if you'd really like to do a big event in the fall, you may have to cut elsewhere. That may mean just changing some events so that they cost little or nothing rather than canceling. A group hike, for example, is a great sound body event that costs little or nothing. This budget balancing experience will be invaluable to you in any career.
Once you've got a budget, it should tie in with internal controls. No spending that's not budgeted. If an opportunity comes up that is not budgeted, it needs to be approved by execs and maybe something else needs to be cut to balance it.
Let's do a big picture recap. First, what is the history? Second, What should change? Third, what's the forecast? And finally, do we have buy-in? Once you have a budget and a calendar, reality is highly likely not to cooperate, and that's why we do comparisons of budget to actual at least monthly, and more often in times of rapid change like during recruitment. But that's a topic for another day. Thank you, listeners. It's a great day to be a SIGAP.
Thank you.